Hello everyone and welcome to my 80th anniversary D-Day special, and this is the full complete build step by step of the 176 scale D-Day Battlefront from Airfix. I'll take you through the complete build from the painting of the diorama to the building of the tanks, painting the infantry, the placement, the final build and the weathering. So let's have a start with what we actually get inside the box and have a look what we've got to work with. So this is the first of the Airfix dioramas that I've done. I've been looking forward to getting my hands on this one for quite a while. So it's a starter set, so we should get a good set of paints and some cement and a couple of brushes. The diorama kit looks pretty good. It's very shiny, so I wonder how the paint's going to stick to it. Obviously, a good set of instructions. We'll have a good read through those. What I'll do is I'll post the instructions for each set. It's got some decals, not a lot. I'll post the instructions as we go, and I'll speed up through some of the bits that are a little bit time intensive. The entire build for this took about 30 hours, so I'll try and condense this video down to just the important parts. My hope is that one day somebody will use it to build along and hopefully have some good results. So we've got the Tiger, we've got some infantry there. I've noticed there's a lot of infantry in this kit. I won't be using most of these because the diorama is quite small. I don't want it to look too crowded. Always have a good read through the instructions before you start any build. It's great advice. One thing I will say about this set of instructions is wouldn't have been helpful if the picture of the diorama on the back was in colour. So we're going to start with the first paint of the diorama. The diorama base itself is going to have probably 3 coats go over it, different layers each time. Just going to secure it down so it doesn't move around too much. Have a good look at the detail. It looks quite shiny. I'm not a big fan of using primer or undercoats really, unless I really have to. I'm going to have a quick look at the paints that come with the kit. Any of you that are experienced with starter sets before will know that sometimes you do get dried out paints. These all look similarly quite good. One or two are a little bit thick, but for the main part of the painting, I'm going to be using some Vallejo paint, mostly watered down 50/50. And for the roadway where I'm going to start, I'm going to use some Vallejo Dark Earth, watered down 50% with water. It does go on. It looks like I'm just painting with water here, but you'll find as the video goes on, as it's sped up, as this paint starts to dry, it will start to darken down, especially into the recesses and the detail on the roadway, and you'll see that as the time lapse goes on. I'm going to make sure all the mud parts get a good double coating of a very thin layer of paint, and it'll really add some depth. There's a lot of detail that the camera's not picking up here, so the paving on the roadway will look great. We're going to do that in a grey. Once we've got the first paint washed down, we're going to go over it with a black wash as well to really make those details pop out. You'll notice here as the paint starts to dry out in the tracks, it's taken on a really dark colour. This is one of the bonuses of this paint. It doesn't look as good as it does when it's dry. You'll really start to see the detail pop out. It's one of the reasons that I like to use the sped up footage, because one, nobody wants to see me painting for what turns out to be about 6, 7 hours of just painting on the diorama alone. But it does allow you to see the effect taking shape as the footage speeds past. Now, as I'll start to add some detail, I'm a great believer in painting things the way that you want to paint them. This is your model. You've spent money on it. You get creative, and it's how you learn how to do different techniques. So I'm really going to try and get a lot of detail, as much as I can, onto this diorama. Initially, I thought I'd have a problem with the paint crawling away on the surface, but I've got to say it's sticking to the plastic extremely well. It's a lot to do with the quality of the paint, but I'm having no problems with it creeping at all, even when it's watered down by 50%. On the first paint, the colours will always be quite garish and quite stand out. It makes it look a little bit cartoonish on your first paint. But what I'm doing is I'm putting the base colours down, and we're just going to weather over the top of them. So don't worry that it looks a little bit unrealistic as you do your first coat, especially when we move on to do the paving, and the contrast of the grey is really light against the rest of the colours. But as I say, once we've got the first paint done, and then we move on to the assembly, the second paint and the weathering, we'll take that cartoonish look away by adding washes over the top and adding a few dabs of colour here and there to make it look a lot more realistic. Once we've got all the paving done, you can just about see that the paving has got some square etching in there. A nice thin black wash is going to sit in those really nicely and bring those paving slabs right out and really provide a good contrast. So around the central foundations, what I've done is I've painted that lovely red lead colour on what looks like to be the collapsed roof section, which we'll see when we build the central building later on. And over that I'll put a bit of a black wash to pick out those squares. And for the outbuildings around the side, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint them all in sort of a dirty yellow ochre to simulate the plaster, which I'm going to put on the central build too. Now behind the central build there is some grey stonework which we're going to black wash and bring out those stones. On the floors of each of the buildings I'm going to do some nice dark wood and line out the floorboards with some black. Now that the first paint is complete, we're going to go over the base with a very thin black wash so we can pull out the detail and know where we need to go with the second coat. You can be quite bold with the black wash as long as it's nice and thin. Don't worry about it pooling. When it dries, it will dry off a lot thinner than it goes on, and you'll see the effect a lot more when we move on to the paving. just allow the wash to pool in parts. You can always spread it out, make it a little bit thinner. And once the wash dries off, you'll see as the footage is sped up that it does dry off and pales back a little bit. And remember, we're going to go over the top of this again to add another layer of colour and another layer of depth. And once we've got the black wash done, we're going to go over it with a very thin coating of some Vallejo matte varnish. So that's the stage one paint more or less complete. As you can see, we've already got a lot of detail going on. That was probably 6 hours paint in there that we've managed to crack in about 10 minutes. Now we need to build the tanks, so we're going to start with the M4 Sherman. I really like building these small armour, the little 176 scale tanks. I have a lot of fun building them. They can be quite fiddly, but you get a really good result really quickly. I think this is one of my favourite little builds to do. Track wheels can be a little bit fiddly. Some people aren't a fan of the rubberized track either. Now in the instructions it does say to melt these together, but I just tend to use a bit of glue to keep these together. The fit on these small bits of armour is really good, but you really will have to make sure that you file off any of your little lumps and bumps. Because the kits are so small, the tolerances are really quite fine. So yeah, you really do have to make sure that you've cleaned up the parts before you try and fit them together, or you'll have a bit of trouble and you'll have some big panel gaps. Those panel gaps don't look as bad when the armour's bigger, but when they're small, it really does exaggerate it. One thing I like to make sure of building the tanks for the diorama is that I leave the turret free, so that when you put it on the diorama, you can point the turret in which direction you want. It gives you a bit of freedom to move. There's nothing worse than gluing the turret in and then finding it's pointing off in the wrong direction. When it comes to painting the tanks, we're going to paint them clean, so there won't be any weathering on the tanks until they actually get to the part where they're going to be put onto the base. This will give you the option to match it in a little bit, to match it with its surroundings, to give it a really nice pristine look before you put it in there, and then you can think about weathering it up to match. As you can see, I'm using one of the supply paints here. Um, what I will say is when you open these small plastic tubs, I would add a good quantity of water in there. I would probably you want at least a third of the volume of the paint that you've got added in for water and give it a really good mix afterwards. Even then, when you start adding the paint, use the cap. as a little palette. Add a little bit of water until you've got quite a thin watery wash. You know the rules. Lots of thin coats, much better than one big thick one. The rubber tracks were easy enough to fit. Um, Sometimes you'd have to leave one of the jockey wheels on the tank a little bit loose so you can get the tracks to fit around. But these ones went on really quite well. Uh, I didn't use any heat to solder these together. I just used a blob of glue and clamped them and just let them dry naturally. Time to apply the decals. They're not complicated. There's not a lot of them, but they do look a little bit too brand new once they're on. I don't know. Maybe you're a fan of that, but we will be weathering over the tank later to take a little bit of the brightness out of them. A bit challenging with the surface. Sometimes these small models have a lot of detail underneath the decal. If you do get a little bit of problem, wait till it's about semi-dry, and then just give it a little bit of pressure to mould it around the detail underneath. And now we're going to move on to the build of the Tiger. I'm looking forward to this one because I'll be trying a camo pattern that I've not tried before. So similar kit, a little bit more complicated. There's a lot more wheels. There's sort of 3 layers to the track wheels on this one. Same rubberized track, still pretty easy to use. It's a little bit bigger, a little bit wider. The whole tank has got a little bit more scale to it, but it is a little bit more complex. So I'm going to use a bit of super glue on this one to keep these tracks together, with the wheels being a lot more complex. Again, I'm going to use the kit supply colours because they're in quite good condition, but they are going to be quite heavily watered down, as I've said before, to keep the coats nice and thin and get a good, nice, even finish. I've not really got any hard and fast rule with painting on the sprue or painting when assembled. Sometimes there it isn't much easier just to paint them on the sprue, especially when we've got such complex wheels as we've got here. It's nice to give everything a good coat before you assemble, but it's down to personal preference. So here we go with the wheel and track assembly. Just make sure you get the right ones. There are a few different types. There's 3 different types here, and some have a recess and some don't. And some have rivet detail and some don't. So just keep your eye on which ones you're using, especially if you're doing what I do and cut them all off the sprue straight away, so you won't know which number's which. Just match them up to the detail of the rivets. Moving on to the main body assembly, again, give it a good file off, make sure you've got no lumps and bumps. But what you will find with this particular tank is there's no real support, so it's really tricky to get it to glue together all in the right place in the one piece. I found myself holding it to get it to glue, I've not found a method yet that supports this nicely. I was thinking about putting a bit of blue tack in the centre until the glue had set and then picking the blue tack out. But as you can see, I had a little bit of a struggle with it, but it wasn't too bad in the end. So this was the part of the painting I was really looking forward to do the camo pattern on the tiger. Now I didn't have a plan setting out, so I just thought I'll have a go freehand and see what it comes out like. Let me know in the comments what you think, but I was really pleased with the outcome. Again, assembling the tracks on this one was really quite easy. They're a lot wider than they are on the Sherman. What I found was though that they did tend to pull in slightly to the centre, so you will have to put like a little dab of super glue just to keep them on straight. The decals on the Tiger do come individually, so they're quite difficult to get lined up by eye. Instead of them being a three-digit number on one sheet like you usually have, these are all individual. So you have to be really careful to get them lined up properly. And I had a bit of a faff just to get them straight. I found that if you line them up to the hull and then move them down, that really helps. So that's both the tanks complete and painted up without weathering. So next we're going to look at painting up the infantry. Now, as I mentioned at the start of the video, the kit does come with an awful lot of infantry. There's far too many for what I want to achieve. I think the diorama would be really crowded and it looked more like a party than it would do like a battle scene. So I'm going to select half of each of the Allied and German soldiers, a good selection of each position, and keep the rest for a rainy day or another project. I'm going to start by painting up the Germans. So I've got a lot of figures to do here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount them to a couple of steel rulers so I can move them all at once and get the paint evenly distributed. I'm going to use Humbrol, the Prue Blue, really from the D-Day Spitfire, because it's just the right colour for the German uniforms. Now it is watered down slightly, so it's watered down about a third, just to get it to adhere to all the models because they are really quite shiny. And it will end up having a couple of coats just to make it nice and even. But as you can see, it's much easier to move lots of models about if you've got them all blue tacked to your ruler. Once you're happy with the base coat, it's time to move on to painting the other parts of the uniform. So we're going to do the boots in a shiny gloss black, the one that came with the kit, which is the Humbrol 33. Now the stands that they come with are eventually going to be cut off. They're quite handy just for keeping them on to stand them up for painting, but they will be cut off and glued directly to the diorama to give it a more realism. I'm speeding through the painting by speeding the video up because the painting of the infantry took between 6 and 8 hours in total. That's how much footage was recorded. And obviously we don't want to sit here and watch me painting little tiny bits on for 6 hours. For the parts of the uniform which are leather, I'm going to use the Vallejo model colour saddle brown. It really does give a good effect for those leather belts and leather pouches. Incidentally, the brush I'm using here is a Graduate 10/0 from Dowler It's called a spotter. I got it from Hobbycraft. It was £3.30, which I don't think is much at all. But this brush has been an absolute godsend for painting these small figures and doing some of the detail. So I'd highly recommend you get one of those. Moving on to the Americans, I wanted them to have green trousers with sort of a camouflage, sort of a sandy coloured camouflage top and jacket, and I'm going to use some ochre for the webbing. So selecting the soldiers that I want, again these ones are going to come off the stand. Some of them don't have stands, so I'm going to remove all of the stands after they're painted. I'm going to use a very light green on the trousers, because after the figures are painted, I'm going to use that light black wash that I'm very fond of, and what that will do is it'll pull all the creases and all the fabric folds. It will really make them stand out. Plus, it'll also darken the base color slightly. I'm going to use the olive paint from the starter kit for the main base color of the uniform, but this one was really quite thick, so it's getting watered down about 50% to make it nice and smooth on the model. Keep building up the base coats with thin layers until you've got a nice, rich, even colour. Remember, it will darken down once we put the wash on, but they're starting to look like they're getting a good cover on them now. Once we've got the uniform painted up, we're going to move on to some saddle brown for the boots. For faces and hands, we're going to use the Vallejo model colour Dark Flesh. But when you look at it in the bottle, it almost looks like it's got an orange tinge and it looks really white. But as it dries off, it really does darken down and becomes quite a good match for flesh. And now I'm going to use an ochre on the American infantry webbing pouches and ammo pouches, and it really does give a nice contrast between the camo, the green of the pants, and the webbing. Now they're mostly done, I'm going to line them all up all in one place and then go at them with a little bit of detail and see all the bits that I've missed or I might have rubbed off with my fingers. You can use a bit of blue tack stuck on the end of a paintbrush. A lot of people do that. When you've got a lot to do like this, it becomes a bit painful to do it that way. But they will get now a really light black wash over the top of them, and you'll see the detail of all the clothing really pop out. So that's the infantry, both sets painted up 6, 7 or 8 hours later. And now it's time to move on to the second paint of the diorama. So for the second part of the paint, I've built the centre building, the 4 walls and the broken roof, and I've placed a few of the barrels. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add a bit of colour and depth to the diorama. We're going to put some foliage in, some green, and we're going to use the Revell weathering set powders because I've used them to great advantage for weathering before. It's a really good set. They're about 10 quid from Amazon. I'll stick a link in the description so you can get your own. So we're going to be using the dark mud green and the sand to give this diorama a bit more life. Then over the top of that we're going to put the Vallejo matte varnish. So around the sides now we're going to use some Vallejo dark green because a lot of these little lumps and bumps here, they're not just piles of rubbish. I think they'll look like they'll look good as bushes. The green goes on really light, but you'll find again as it darkens down, as it dries, it looks really good. Again, we're going to put some more thin black wash over the top of all this to bring out the bumps and bring out the details and make it look more three-dimensional. So while that dries off, we're going to add some rust and some weathering to the tanks. To weather the tanks, I'm going to use a combination of a rust wash and a black wash. Now, any of the weathering, you can find out how to do them yourself if you look at my scale modelling tutorials playlist. There's such things in there as how to do panel lines without an airbrush. It's a nice little effect. How to strip paint with Dettol, how to do rust, mud, and black wash. So again, there'll be a link in the description to the scale modelling tutorials playlist for you to have a look at. So we're going to start with a bit of rust colour. So what we need to do is we need to get it really watery because we just want a sheen of rust, and then afterwards when it's dried off, if we need a little bit more detail on the corners, then we can use a thicker paint. I think the weathering for these two tanks needs to be quite subtle. I've sometimes been guilty of going a little bit too far with the weathering, but the paint job specifically on the Tiger is it's one of my favourites, so I don't want to overdo it. I want to make it look really good. So just a touch of weathering. I'm not going to go too far. The beauty of the weathering powders is that you mix them with water to get them on, so you can make it as thick as thin or as thin as you like. But you can, if when it dries you find it's a little bit too much, just add more water and it reactivates the powder, and you can bring it back or add more to it. Now, bear in mind that it will also dry a lot lighter than you put it on. So when you apply the matte varnish over the top, it will bring that effect down right back to the darkness again. I'm just applying the rust wash to the edges and to anywhere where there's a bit of detail. So around the hatches, around the edges and the seams and any welds, I'll be placing a bit on the back louvers of the Tiger. Later on in the video, as it's sped up, you'll be able to see the rust wash drying off and becoming light as the time lapse goes forward. When you're applying the rust to the wheels, put a dark coating on the outside and then dip your brush back in the water and just let the water pool around the hubs. And when it dries off, you get that lovely circle of rust, which is really hard to paint freehand. But if you just let nature do it itself and let it dry off, it'll leave that very faint circle of rust in the centre. If you look at the top of the Sherman tank on the turret now, that rust wash has dried in and it's become really quite pale. And once I put the varnish on near the end, you'll see that rust pop forward again. That's enough rust for the tanks, so we're going to wait till we do the assembly for putting the black wash on. So now we're going to move on to the final assembly and weathering of the whole thing and put it all together and see what we've got. So now it's time to put it all together, get it all weathered and varnished off, and get it complete. So we're going to add the accessories that come with the kit. We get an awful lot of these little bits and bobs, little motorbikes, more sandbags, signs and things like that. I'm not going to add them all. As I keep saying, I don't want it to be too busy. I want it to be quite sparse. I think if you tried to get everything on here, it would just be a mess of just a hodgepodge of bits and bobs. So I'm just going to select a few bits. I'm going to put the signs in, probably some of the barriers too. And part of it as well is to add a bit more weathering. So where the impact craters are, we're going to blacken them in, and then the whole thing itself will get a varnish coat. I can afford to be quite bold with the black weathering powder because if I go too far, I can always add more water and thin it out quite a lot. So I'm going to add it into all the tracks. So the track detail will really start to pop out. The weathering powder will sit within the tracks and the water will wash it away from the surface and it will blend in. So you'll just be able to see the lines of the tank tracks. With the craters, I'll put a bit of water in and plenty of the black powder and swirl it around a bit. And as the black pigment settles, it'll settle into the bowl of the impact crater and make it look really good. You can see here adding the black wash to the bushes and the foliage, it's starting to make it look more three-dimensional. Just slap it on and add lots of water over the top, and it'll sit within the little grooves where the bushes have the textures, and the black will sit in the pits and make it look more three-dimensional. I'm going to add another coating of black wash over the pavements to bring out the seams, and add another coating of black wash over all the bushes around the back of the buildings, and probably on the stonework of the buildings as well, so that stands out. In an effort to get this finished, I'm going to use my homemade drying booth. This is just a USB booth that I built to accelerate the drying. If you want to build one yourself, there's a link in the description to my other channel, 5 Minute Workshop, and there's a video on there showing you how I made it. It's quite simple, but it really does reduce that drying time, and it can be quite handy if you're getting a bit pushed for time, but you want to get some more done. It's time to place the infantry about, and what I've done is I've cut all the stands off, and to get them to fix, I'm going to put a dab of super glue on each foot or on the belly to keep them all safe and standing upright. It took me a while to work out where to put them all. As you can imagine, if I'd have put them all on, like we got nearly twice this amount, it would have been too crowded. Now the infantry's all placed, we're going to get the last bits of the street furniture in. We're going to put the road signs up and the blockades. And the final bit of weathering to do is a little bit of black wash over the tanks and wherever else it's needed. And then we're going to cover the whole model with a thin layer of Vallejo matte varnish to protect the paint and to add that final depth and that final bit of weathering to make it look really good. Always room for a little bit more rust on the corrugated iron. Just give it a bit more rust on the barrels. Get some water on it, make it look nice and rusty and nice and weathered. When it comes to putting the varnish on, I can afford to be quite bold and get it really slapped on there. This stuff's really good quality. It dries really thin. It takes all the brightness out of some of the colours if they're a bit too glossy. It just protects the paintwork and makes sure that when you're handling it, it doesn't come off under your fingers. So I like to use a proper brush. As you can see here, it's a 1-inch brush for all the thick bits. Get it all onto the tracks first. It does go on really milky, but it dries perfectly clear. So there we have it. 30 hours of building and filming, 6 hours of editing, and I'm finished. And I'm really pleased with the result. So from a few different angles, you can see a bit of a close-up, and I couldn't be happier with it. Please do get into the comments, give it a like and give it a comment. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you'd have done differently, or if you've done the kit yourself. I've really enjoyed it. I couldn't recommend this kit more. Please do have a look at the Facebook group. Come and join us, share your work. The group is called Scaled Modelling for Everyone. I'd really be pleased to have you. We've had a few members. We're a very small group at the moment. And please do, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a like, give it a comment, and if you'd be so kind, give me a subscription as well. Thank you very much for getting to the end of the video. I hope to see you again soon. I'm going to make another diorama as soon as possible. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.